Perfect. Thank you so much, Shannon. And of course, I love being here. And I always get excited when Shannon allows me to pick my topic because native grasses is probably my favorite one to talk about. And my goal today is to get everybody just a little bit more excited about this topic and maybe even go so far as to try a native grass on your property this fall, because fall is the perfect time to be planting this stuff. So, as Shannon said, my name is Michaela Boley. I work for the University of Maryland Extension Service in Talbot County, and I do the home horticulture and coordinate the local Master Gardener program here. I have been here since, I gotta think about it, I think it's almost 13 years, so 2012, yes. All right. And of course, as a participant in these webinars, you're probably a little familiar with this slide, but I just like to reiterate that we do not discriminate in our programs, and our programs are open and equal to all individuals. So this is just a good reminder of that. Okay, so here's a little breakdown of how I'm going to organize our thoughts today. I'm going to start with just talking a little bit about grass anatomy so that you know what I'm talking about as I go through the presentation. I'm going to talk about a lot about the benefits of native grasses, and then I'm going to go over some suggested species for either trying on like a home landscape or even like a buffer management area, and they all have different strengths. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about invasive grasses that I'm hoping people can avoid. So when I talk about grasses, I think many of us probably picture in our mind's eye turf grass. And that's kind of the thing we're the most familiar with. It's quite an industry, right? The turf grass maintenance industry. And so when you think about grass, you're probably looking at something like we see on the right. And this is just a good reminder that even turf grass is made up of just individual plants of grasses just planted over and over and over again. They're just on a smaller scale. And the way that we manage them would be a lot different than if we allow grasses to go to seed, like we do with a lot of our native grasses or even ornamental grasses. And so, what I'd like you to start thinking about is the anatomy on the left. And that's really, it's more of a complex plant than we give it credit for. We think of grasses as kind of being boring, but they're just like any other flowering plant. They have stems, they have leaves, they have complex flower inflorescences. So if you walk away with anything today, it's that maybe a little bit more of an appreciation for different grass species. And this is just to kind of highlight a lot of the unique qualities and why at least I enjoy grasses so much. We may not think of them as being particularly showy or colorful because often we're thinking of flowering plants. But grasses have their own beauty and they come in many different shapes and sizes. And I think a lot of their benefits are not just the seed heads or the flowers themselves, but the grass as a whole. So you can see just a wide array of different colors, different seed heads. Again, they're all developed very differently. This isn't a turf grass. These are native grasses, and so they have different adaptations that makes them unique in our climate. And I'm going to go over some of these species, so don't panic if I don't talk about them. So first, let me talk about some of the benefits of native grasses, warm season grasses in particular. So a lot of our grasses are separated into what we call cool season and warm season. And the emphasis I place a lot more on is warm season native grasses because they're the ones who are doing the bulk of their growth in temperatures that are higher. So now is about the time that they're starting to really infloresce. They're starting to be more showy. So those are the species I'm going to talk about. But we also have a lot of what we call cool season grasses. That includes a lot of the turf grass species, including tall fescue, which is our most popular turf grass here in Maryland. But getting back to the warm seasons, one of the benefits or one of the biggest benefits is the carbon sequestration that they can perform. So an intact grassland can sequester 2 to 5 tons of carbon per year on every acre. So even though grasslands only make up about 5% of Earth's biomass, they account for 20 to 30% of carbon sequestration, which is quite a bit. Basically, it's taking atmospheric CO2 and fixing it in the plants themselves. That is actually more efficient than a lot of our trees, which get the most attention for kind of carbon sequestration. But, like I said before, worm season grasses, they are C4 plants. And what does that mean? That means that these plants are more efficient at photosynthesizing and they are more productive in hot and dry climates. They also require less water in order to function. So essentially, that makes them better at adapting to high heat and higher carbon atmospheres. So, what does that mean for us in this climate that we find ourselves shifting and maybe warming up a little bit more than usual? Grasslands are going to be much better adapted and more resilient in those kind of environments. And of course, um, our grasslands, they have very fibrous root systems. Think about a tree's root systems, which is pretty woody, but pretty dispersed. Grasses have a much finer fibrous root system that makes them really good at preventing erosion, first of all, but it also means they have better drought tolerance because they can penetrate the soil horizon a lot better and grow a lot deeper. The Of course, I like to pick on turf grass, but turf grass roots only reach about maybe 4 to 5 inches into the soil. Healthy root systems, maybe 5 or 6. When we talk about warm season native grasses, we're talking about feet into the soil that they can grow. So I forget which one. I think it's big blue stem can grow 12 feet into the soil in like a prairie setting. So this means they make excellent above ground vegetated buffers for catching not only water, but nutrients and things like that. Buffers that soak up these rain events that we find ourselves experiencing more and more. But they also make really excellent drought resistant landscapes, which is what we're finding ourselves dealing with, right? When we do get rain, it's high volume and very intense, but then we go through longer periods of drought or where we have no rain. So, what I like to say is that warm season native grasses are really good at adapting to those kind of adverse conditions. And again, I know those flowers get all of the attention. And when you think about pollinators and insects, you're thinking about a lot of those flowers. And yes, you need flowers in order to support a lot of insect life, but grasses also support a wide range of wildlife, including butterflies. Actually, several grasses are a larval host plant, which means that a specific species of butterfly, or skipper in this case, has to lay its eggs, and those caterpillar must feed on the host plant before it can become an adult. We also have a lot of moths that use them for larval host plants, bees that use the stems for nesting, because a lot of grass stems are hollow. Beetles especially use the ground cover and the shelter that bunch grasses provide because they live in the soil or at the soil horizon. And then, of course, our regular wildlife, we're used to seeing birds. They need it for habitat. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make is trying to cut down all of their grasses at the end of the season in the fall, where the most benefits for habitat that grasses can provide is through the winter and actually into early spring. And you'll notice a lot of high bird activity during those months because the leaves are not on the trees anymore, right? So they have to find a dense habitat somewhere else. And there's even benefits to livestock. There's a few of these native grasses that are considered excellent forage for a lot of livestock. And these two skippers that I've put on this slide, the Zabulon and the dusted, those are both what we call host specific species. So they must lay their eggs on a specific grass species in order to complete their life cycle. So again, even though flowers receive a lot of attention when it comes to pollinators, it's all about having a well-rounded ecosystem, and grasses are part of that. I like to talk about beetle banks for a second too. This is kind of like a sustainable agriculture technique that they use, especially in the Midwest, but it can be adapted. I would think even for the home landscape, you could adapt something like this. It's this system where you're essentially providing a refuge strip of native grasses and flowering plants as well. And it's kind of this bermed system, and it's a refuge not only for insects, but it's also an attractant for a lot of predatory insects, which might help control pest populations. Um, and essentially, it could also act as a buffer. So like uh, a riparian buffer, maybe if you were near waterways. But it's kind of this bermed area, and it's allowed to kind of go fallow. So this is something might include in row crops or something that they're turning over a system, a cropping system. But this is essentially a perennial berm, so you don't disturb it, so that you can get those benefits of the wildlife that would use it year to year. It's a really fascinating system, and I can send people more information if they want to know more about that. But let's get into the grass species themselves. This is what I like to talk about the most. I start out with the really tall native grasses. These are species that are probably going to be better suited for more conservation landscaping, where you have a lot of area to work with, because a very tall grass in like a small home landscape can sometimes feel very intimidating, or because they are so tall, they have a chance to flop over. But in a larger buffer or conservation landscapes, these work really well. Big blue stem is one of my favorite. Now, this isn't native to the coastal plain of Maryland, but it is to the Piedmont and the mountain regions, and it's definitely native to the Midwest area. And this is one of my favorites for color. It has one of the best fall colors. It also has a distinctive seed head that they call turkey foot. So it also can go by that name in the trade, but it can get very tall. It can get up to 6.5 feet tall. It's also considered, I believe, a good forage grass for livestock. Likewise, Indian grass is also a very tall grass that can become dominant in a meadow. It's usually something that takes a few years. We have what we call early successional grasses, which come in like when you stop mowing. Like maybe the next year you start to see those grasses. And then you have the grasses that build some longevity, that are going to be there for the long run, and that is Indian grass. It also has a very beautiful color. It has these steely blue foliage and then these like amber colored seed heads in the fall. But it also can get very tall. You might see 8 feet tall and think I'm exaggerating, but it takes several years, but it can get that tall. Now, switchgrass is one of my favorites because it's probably one of the most adaptable to a wide variety of growing conditions. And it's very commonly found in the trade. So you would be able to find this at a plant nursery, or easily found in grass mixes and things like that. Great for grassland birds, great for erosion control. It can tolerate wet soils, it can tolerate really dry soils. It's just very adaptable. But again, this is a little bit taller grass. I would say a lot of the varieties that they sell for the home landscape are much shorter. So I think I have an example on the next slide, where they're only maybe like 3 or 4 foot tall. And that might be a better choice for a small landscape. And then Eastern Gamma grass is one that I see commonly, at least here in Talbot County. It likes a wetter soil. So this is something you're going to find in ditches. And it's a big clump forming grass. It's very hard to remove, but it does an excellent job of erosion control. It functions very well in ditches because it soaks up a ton of water. So this is better for us with clay or loamy soils that stay moist for a longer time. And here's a few examples of switchgrass. These are different varieties. So the one on the right is called North Wind. And this was developed because switchgrass has a tendency to kind of flop over in like just the wild in natural areas. But this variety is very upright. It does not flop over. It would take a tornado, I think, to really make it bend over. And then the one on the left is called Shenandoah, and it was developed because of this beautiful red color that the leaves develop. And I believe that red color is persistent through the summer, so it doesn't just develop in the fall. But of course, it looks very attractive in the fall. And then there's our turkey foot. That's the big blue stem. The seed heads are just gorgeous. And the whole plant develops this kind of dark purple color in the fall when it's starting to turn. And it can just make a really attractive landscape plant. Okay, so Now we're getting to grasses that maybe are a more reasonable size. We're looking at like 3 to 5 feet tall. This is where we're going to start to see a lot more of the plants that we use in like a home landscape or, in more common landscapes. Little blue stem is probably my favorite grass of all time. It's the grass for people who don't like grasses. It's got a very upright habit, which means it won't like flop over. It has a steely blue color throughout the summer. The foliage is very like light blue. And then in the fall, it turns this beautiful red, orange, purple colors. It just has all of the spectrum of colors, and it has these really fuzzy seed heads, which are really attractive. And there's a lot of varieties available of this as well. But even the straight species is pretty gorgeous. Pink muhly grass is another one you'll probably see pretty commonly in the landscape. It's the one that develops the really fluffy pink seed heads that almost look like clouds. These look really nice if you clump them together. If you have like 3 to 5 pink muhly grasses, it makes a really nice statement in terms of design. And then when I talk about broom sedge, this is what we call one of those early successional grasses. So broom sedge is probably the thing that shows up first when you stop mowing your grass. I actually love it. It might look a little raggedy to some people, but it has great winter color and it has a nice upright habit, so it's not going to be flopping over. I hate things that just bend over and fall over. So I like things that have a nice upright habit. And it persists through the winter. It's the thing that has the most color when, we have a really brown winter. It's a nice bronze orangey color. You probably know what I'm talking about. As you drive around in the winter, you notice it the most. And then a couple more, bottlebrush grass is one of our cool season grasses, actually. So this is something that develops early in the season. It does its most growth in the spring, and then it has these really cool seed heads that really do look like you would wash a bottle with it. Um, and it's pretty large, so it makes kind of a decorative statement. And then, of course, purple top. And this is a grass that is notorious for being really tough. It grows on like roadsides, so it's seeing like the worst soil conditions possible. But it looks really nice if you have a lot of them in a field, because those purple seed heads make a very attractive color. It's kind of like a purple cloud in the field. Okay, so starting on the left, that's broom sedge, and this is taken, of course, in the winter, but it's just got some vibrant color in a time where you don't have a lot of color when it's kind of brown. There's the brush grass in the middle. And again, this is kind of like June is when the seed head starts to develop. Most warm season grasses, you won't see their seed heads develop until like September and October. So now's the time. And then, of course, purple top, which this picture is not doctored. The seed heads are really that purple. And then a few, so these are my two favorites that I like for a home landscape because I think they have some really attractive qualities and they are not too tall, so they don't feel too intimidating. That split beard blue stem on the left, and it has these really fluffy white seeds you can see in the picture, but it also has those kind of orangey stems, which make a really attractive fall color. And then, of course, the little blue stem on the right pairs very well with a lot of our asters. So, about September, October, the little blue stem turns to like an orange red color, and then you have that purple asters blooming, and those two colors together just work really well. And if you plant goldenrod on top of it, oh, it's just perfect. Then you have a really spectacular fall. And here are two grasses. This is actually at the Delaware Botanic Gardens. There's kind of these two grasses in the forefront and then in the background. The pink muhly grass we talked about with that really pinky cloud seed head, and then the switchgrass in the back, which is a little bit more brown in color, but switchgrass has a lot of other functions that are really nice. All right, if you want to try and stay low to the ground, we have a lot of grasses that are also about 3 feet or less. Purple love grass is one of the best that I think you can use, especially because it only gets to be about a foot tall and it grows in really tough soil. So if you have like an unforgiving soil with low fertility, this is your grass. It grows really low to the ground and it also has these kind of reddish purple cloud seed heads, but they're just very low to the ground. So it's very different from pink muhly grass, which is much taller. Prairie dropseed is another one that's really great to use, especially in ornamental settings. Um, the seed heads are very decorative, and the leaves themselves grow pretty low to the ground, and they're a clump grass, so they look very orderly. They don't look like weedy weedy things. Uh, and then some of my other favorites, wavy hair grass. This is another cool season grass. Tolerates some part shade. What most grasses don't do is tolerate shade very well, but there are a few that will tolerate part shade. And this one even stays semi-evergreen through the winter. So, it doesn't turn brown and look kind of dead. It actually will keep a lot of its green color. And then if you're out here on the eastern shore or you're on a coastal kind of plain, salt meadow hay is one of my favorite grasses. This is something that we use in living shorelines. This is an upland grass, but it has a high tolerance for salt and brackish tidal water. So this is something you plant above the mean high tide. So it's not going to grow right in the water, but it may be able to handle a hurricane here or there. But it just has a really attractive, fine quality. I'm switching to the next slide so I can talk about it. So that's the salt meadow hay in the bottom right corner. It forms a kind of a mat when it gets established. And honestly, I'd rather have this than turf grass any day. I would take just salt meadow hay in my front yard. It just has some really beautiful texture to it. And real quickly, I'm going to talk about a few grass-like natives because it, what kind of gets confused are sedges and grasses, and they're actually two different plant families. But sedges look very much like grasses because the leaf structure that they have, but they end up being a little bit more adaptable when it comes to moist and shady conditions. So if you have a lot of shade, what I might recommend is using a sedge instead of a native grass. But they are also very beneficial when it comes to supporting wildlife and other environmental functions. So there's a lot of sedges here. Some are tolerant to shade, might be a good alternative for some other non-natives that you have growing under trees. But we also have some that are really good for rain gardens, like the tussock sedge. That's something we have in our rain garden here at the Talbot office. It tolerates freshwater flooding, and it's kind of attractive. It forms a very orderly clump, and it has these kind of flower heads in the spring. But there's lots of different sedges for different growing environment. I think we have over like 300 species of sedge here in Maryland. So I like to say there's probably a sedge for every growing condition possible. And this is just an example of sedges in the environment. That's a blue sedge in the top right corner. And yes, it is that blue. It's a very attractive color. That's something that works well in a shady woodland area where native grasses might not grow because it's too much shade. Actually, I really like Pennsylvania sedge as a lawn alternative as well. It also tolerates some shade and very dry soil, which it's hard to find things that tolerate dry and shade. But if you want a more comprehensive guide for using sedges in the landscape, Mount Cuba released a really nice report of their research in using sedges. And they kind of used it as like a grass alternative, or they had a trial plot where they used it, but they evaluated a broad spectrum of characteristics for using sedges, so it wasn't just if you used it as a lawn, it was using it in every kind of environment. And you can either use like the short guide or you can download the data if you're really nerdy and you want to know like all the nitty-gritty statistics. It had some excellent reports of a variety of sedges. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the grasses I hope everybody can avoid going forward from today. And some of them are probably familiar, and you may know this already, but I like to point out some identification characteristics so you know how to distinguish them apart from native grasses. And so I'm only going to cover three, but there's a lot more that are undesirable. All right, so let's start with Johnson grass because it is actually classified as a Maryland noxious weed, which means there is a legal obligation to control this. But I think some people um, confuse it with switchgrass quite often because it has a very similar seed head. So what I like to point out is that Johnson grass has these leaves that are much broader. They're like an inch wide. They're very wide. And it has a very prominent midrib, which is that white stripe going down the middle of the leaf. That is very distinctive to Johnson grass. Panicum or switchgrass will not have that at all. So, if you're confused, look at the leaves. You wouldn't even need the seed head in order to identify them apart. That white midrib running down the middle is very distinctive. Its seed also has what we call these bent awns. So these are basically kind of hairs or extensions of the seed. And they're pretty distinctive too because panicum or switchgrass does not have this. Um, but if you're in the field and you're not looking up close, they can look a little bit alike. So what I like to say is get up close and personal and look for these different characteristics. And there it is in a field, pretty distinctive. You see how big those leaves are. It's kind of a coarse texture. A lot of other grasses are a finer texture, so it's pretty easy to tell them apart. And you can tell from even from the picture that white midrib down the middle of the leaf is very distinctive. Okay, and so here are some lookalikes. We've got Johnson grass right here in the middle, and it's pretty purplish in color. So again, you could confuse it with purple top, which is on the right, except purple top's leaves will also look very different. It's also a much shorter grass. Johnson grass is much taller. And then of course we have switchgrass on the left, and we just talked about how that leaf is very different as well. It will not have that white stripe down the middle. And the two species on either side of the Johnson grass are considered native. So you don't have to feel bad about trying to pull it out or control it. Okay, this is the one I probably get the most hate for because a lot of people do have, actually, not just people, but the industry has a lot of this in the landscape. We see this pretty much everywhere. And it's because we planted it as an ornamental before we really understood that it has an invasive tendencies. So it tends to spread very well. You see those fluffy seed heads that may look really attractive. Well, that makes it really good at dispersing and then showing up everywhere you go. So again, this is an ornamental grass that is not banned for sale per se. But what I like to do is encourage people to maybe turn to one of our native grass alternatives instead, because this can be very aggressive in the landscape and you will be fighting this forever because once it forms and establishes this clump grass, it's impossible to get out. You would need like a backhoe or something to remove it. But it's also very distinctive because it has these silvery, kind of fluffy seed heads. So pretty distinctive. Nothing else really looks quite like it. And it's about this time of year when the seed head starts to form. And what I encourage people to do, especially if you have this at home, is just to cut the seed heads off. It's pretty simple. And then that helps control a lot of seeds from escaping into our natural areas. All right, and then the last grass I'm going to highlight is Japanese stilt grass. So this is something you would find in the shade. This is pretty specific to shady woodland areas, and it especially likes moist woodland areas. It'll just carpet the floor with nothing but this plant, and you can actually kind of see that in the picture in the bottom right corner. And it really crowds out anything else from growing. It's a very prolific cedar. But it is an annual grass. So I like to encourage people, if you can get to it before the seed head stage, that helps control a lot because it's dependent on producing seeds from year to year in order to keep spreading or keep establishing. And this is one that also has kind of a silvery midrib. Let me get my pointer here. So it's kind of hard to tell from the picture, but in real life, this stripe down the center of the leaf is very silvery. It'll kind of reflect light. This may be a better picture right here. So it almost looks white. But this is a small grass. So those leaves are only about 2 inches long. And it's pretty distinctive. It's pretty small compared to a lot of other grasses, but you can see here it's incredibly aggressive. So anybody with a forested woodland does not want this to get established because it will spread very quickly. And just a few more lookalikes for you. Um, Here's another non-native that is also invasive. It's called wavy leaf basket grass. It can look kind of similar because it's a similar size, but these leaves, of course, are rippled or wavy. So that's a good way to tell it apart. You'll also see it has dense hairs on the stem. Whoops, this isn't supposed to say Johnson grass. It's supposed to say uh, Japanese stilt grass, but it also is non-native and very aggressive. Um, but then the one grass that does like to grow in the shade is deer tongue grass. This is a native species, and its leaves are much broader. It doesn't have that silvery midrib, and it lacks the hairs that you would see on the wavy leaf basket grass. So these are just some helpful hints to tell things apart. Again, just because it's a grass and looks weedy doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, but we do have some aggressive, invasive grasses that we want to control. So why do we want to use native grasses in the landscape? Well, number one, they offer a variety of environmental benefits, not just for other wildlife, but for us as well. They're also incredibly easy to grow. Most grasses, the seed only needs to have a temperature of above 70 degrees in order to germinate. And it's that simple. It'll take a couple of weeks and it'll start to germinate. So our warm season grasses, really all they need is a little bit of warmth and sunshine. And then they start to grow. And then once they're in the right conditions, that grass will get established pretty quickly. I also like to think they're equally as attractive. Why do the flowers get all the attention? I don't know, because I think grass flowers and the seed heads are just as attractive as anything else. And I also love this last point, maybe the most, is that they are resilient. They are able to withstand a lot of the changes, whether it be environmental or human intervention. They're able to withstand a lot of abuse, which I love landscapes that are pretty low maintenance, and grasses are really excellent at being low maintenance. Okay. And now I would love to take some questions because I think I see there's a few in the chat box. But I'll also give you this opportunity if you do me a favor and you want to use your phone to scan this QR code. It's a very brief survey. It's 4 questions. And what I recommend is turning your phone on its side. It might be easier to read. But let's see what questions we have in the chat box. Oh, I love to Chelsea mentioned that Eastern gamagrass at the farm for bison. It's the first for yeah, I know why, because Eastern gamagrass is actually closely related to corn. So it must be it's a very dense and nutritious seed head, but the leaves are very productive as well. So I love hearing that it's a favored forage grass for bison. Are there any other questions somebody wants to drop into the chat box? I'll happily talk about grasses all day. I know you don't want that, but I love fielding questions because it's just a very broad category. And I only scraped the surface today of what is out there. We have a lot of native grass species, and they are all really good at adapting to certain conditions. We have a lot of coastal grasses that can tolerate salt water, which is becoming more and more of a problem as we have saltwater intrusion and storm events. And they also just act really well as a buffer for stormwater events, whether you have a rain garden or a bioretention. But I think they're also just equally as attractive. We could be using them in our landscapes, and I think they fit really well. Okay, if there aren't any other questions, I'll leave the QR